Welcome to the Critical Media Studies Podcast. We're your hosts, Mike Rapici
and Barry Falk.
Good morning, Michael. How are you?
Good morning, Barry. I'm doing well. How are you, sir? Good to see you.
I'm doing well. We're going to resume our discussions today, and in a way, we'll be pivoting back, or we're going to begin with a backward glance at William Burroughs and the cut-up. But we're going to move forward in this particular episode to a discussion of Alex Kitnick's wonderful book, a chapter on Marshall McLuhan's The Medium is the Mass Age, Massage.
It's massage today.
Massage today, it is definitely going to be the massage. The medium is the massage, which is, and the discussion that we'll be referencing is we'll be referencing a chapter by Alex Kitnick from his wonderful book, really informative book, Distant Early Warning, Marshall McLuhan and the Transformation of the Avant-Garde. And let me just explain the title and the context of the book. And we're going to obviously talk more about Kitnick's reading of McLuhan, and specifically his reading of The Medium is the Massage. But the general, the premise of the book, maybe we might pull out another chapter to discuss at some point. Kitnick sort of follows McLuhan throughout his career, and the title, the phrase in the title, "Distant Early Warning," that refers to artists. That refers to a statement that Marshall, and this will be hopefully a good preparation to talk about Burroughs. The title of Kitnick's book comes from one of McLuhan's statements, where he says, "Artists always provide the distant early warning system of the new environment, of the new world to come. The artists are the distant early warning system." And so this Kitnick's book is a wonderful exploration of the evolution of not just the evolution of McLuhan's thought, but also the ways in which his thought evolved, the modern art and modern artistic practice kind of evolved and changed and transformed in relation, sometimes in specific relation, to McLuhan's ideas about artistic environments. So, is that a good enough sort of foundation for the intro? Do you want to say anything?
No, I think that
get
works.
To Burroughs?
I think that's good, because really I want to get to I want to get to talking about Burroughs, because I think that the connection between the issues that I brought up, I think it was me with the problem last time.
You were doing the critique of Burroughs's readability and saying that there is a way in which his take on narrative is not artistically satisfying. That's what I remember.
Right. And what struck me about this chapter was I almost feel
Kitnick chapter.
The Kitnick chapter. I almost feel like the Kitnick chapter is the response that I needed to my issue with Burroughs. So it's very very timely in that regard. And sometimes we just get those fortuitous bounces where things work out.
Yeah. Well, I think we both sort of gravitated when in reading Kitnick. I think we both sort of gravitated to the idea that, we need to do a look back as well as move forward, or that Kitnick's discussion of McLuhan will allow us to move back and then also move forward. So we'll try and do that.
Yeah. I think it's probably helpful to start with the very last part of the discussion that we had with Burroughs last time.
Okay, sure, please.
Because it's going to get us to understanding, well, Kitnick's take on McLuhan, I think, is a good answer. So Burroughs is a nice, primer to McLuhan in that regard. So we were talking about the cut up, and the issue I had was, as I recall, was with the randomness of it. Right. And the argument that you're basically just producing gibberish that works in terms of content. right? Like
Well, and but let's talk about the nature of the gibberishness. The nature of the gibberishness is that things are produced or reproduced on the page without any commentary or reflection on narrative sequence, on causal order, right? That's
right.
what's part of what's doing the gibberish, right? It seems to be a random ordering of words and random ordering of syntax, right?
Yeah, and I think that there's two ways in which this randomness exists
Mm-hmm.
that allows it to work, so to speak, right? The one is just that it's so much it's randomness in such a massive sea of content that we as consumers are able to really make whatever that narrative becomes fit into a pre-existing structure because it's not specifically tied to anything. So I can pick sound bites up and that are gibberish and make them fit to confirm or disconfirm any sort of position I want to hold. Um, so in a way, the real problem that I had with the cut up and the fact that the cut up works is that it's so completely acontextual that it's hollow. It's cheap calories, right? It's just taking up space.
Hmm.
Did you want to talk to that at all, or do you want to talk
I
about?
want to talk to that directly
Yeah,
because what you're calling cheap calories, your cheap calories is a value judgment on the function that
let me
is that
qualify it.
not
Just
wrong? Okay, you
well,
don't
no, let
want
me
to.
just qualify. It's cheap calories that are able to exist because so much of the mediascape
Mhm,
is cheap calories,
mhm,
right? So I want to make the distinction that my critique against this is
mhm,
not a critique against art so much as it's a critique against a narrative. It's a critique against the production of information,
mhm,
not art. And
mhm,
it works, I would contend, because it's detached from everything. So it's just
mhm,
like so much other stuff that we can go out and grab and make fit
mhm.
as we see fit.
Well, I think actually that's a very complex response, and I'm just going to introduce McLuhan on Burroughs to say that McLuhan had a more, I think that's very nuanced, what you just said, Michael. And maybe you want to talk about the difference between what you just said and what McLuhan said. As I
Mhm.
understand it, McLuhan's appreciation of Burroughs was a little bit more surface, and it was a little bit more immediate because basically what Burroughs seized upon, he wrote it's called Notes on Burroughs, published in 1964. It's a review of Burroughs' first cut-up novel, The Nova Express. And it's a peculiar review in that it tells you more about McLuhan's system making. Remember, 1963, 1964, this is the big year. He's writing Understanding Media, the big breakthrough. And the first chapter will be The Medium is the Message,
Mhm.
right? So this is around this time. And so he, like a lot of poets, he's like a poet. He reads this other poet and sees his own work. This is what I mean by being, in a sense, I'm sorry, McLuhan's response to Burroughs is it almost simpler. That, it's just that he reads Nova Express and he says the form of this, what you were talking about, the non-causal matter, the contingent matter, there was a word you used that was exactly what he responds to. The fact that it seems to be all contingency or not in sequence. You use another word for this, but the surface chaos is what he said is what McLuhan responds to, and he says, you know what? He's not a storyteller. Burroughs is not a storyteller. What he's giving us on the page is the media environment that
Mhm.
I, as Marshall McLuhan, perceive, and that William Burroughs, like the rest of us, lives in. So he admires Burroughs not as a writer, but as a kind of vehicle
Yeah.
for the media environment. And so he likes his writing. He admires. He admires Burroughs for stepping out of the way, for becoming a kind of a blank slate in which the media environment can sort of make itself felt on the printed page. And that's what, and I'll just read this one little thing about from the review. And you'll see it's a description of, like I said, I was comparing this to a poet's review of another poet's volume of poetry. A lot of times, how poets read and criticize, quote unquote, is they'll see their own patterns
Mhm.
in the poems of others, and their review is often a reflection of their own work as a poet, right? That's how McLuhan reads Burroughs, not as a novelist, right? He's not reading him as a novelist or as a storyteller. He thinks that you don't get a story in Nova Express, you're getting an environment. And that's why McLuhan thinks it's cool. So let me read this real quick excerpt. Today, men's nerves surround us. They have gone outside of the body. Outside, he doesn't say what it is, but
Mhm.
we'll make it clear. Outside means outside of the body, and they exist as an electrical environment. The human nervous system itself can be reprogrammed biologically as ready as any radio network can alter its fare. Burroughs dedicated Naked Lunch to the first proposition and Nova Express to the second. Nova Express indicates some of the corporate is in quotes. He doesn't mean corporation, he means embodied.
Right.
Corporate, as in corpus, body. The corporate responses and adventures of the quote unquote subliminal kid, the character in Nova Express, who is living in a universe which seems to be somebody else's insides, but it's not an inside. It's the media, it's the outside of the media environment. So what so the things that we were saying were unsatisfying or problematic or challenging in Burroughs as a writer, basically, and you use this word in your discussion, you talked about art. And art is a broader word than literature, right?
Mhm.
In a way, like literature is a subspecies of art. And art, and Burroughs is very upfront that when he talks about art and modern art, he's thinking about painting as much, or maybe primarily, rather than the written word and written text. And so what McLuhan, just wrapping it up, what McLuhan recognizes in Burroughs is an artist who's creating an environment and is not existing as the author of a story and as the presiding genius behind the environment. He lets the environment be.
So this is interesting. I want to move to McLuhan in a second, deliberate, or I
Sure.
want to move to Kitnick on McLuhan in a second. But
Okay.
I think that your last little bit there
Mhm.
just it did two things. I think it sort of concretized my position, but it also problematized it. So I want to just sort of throw this back. Okay.
Mhm.
So McLuhan likes Burroughs because he sees the cut up as creating its own media environment. And he
Absolutely.
lauds Burroughs for letting go, for letting it do its thing.
Absolutely.
So now
Absolutely.
this
Without
is
sending,
so
evacuating
right.
himself, right?
So if we think about this, the
Yeah.
media environment
Mhm.
that the book is, right? That becomes the container, okay? And so
Indeed.
this gives us clarity on the idea that the medium is the message and the massage at the same time, okay? You have this container, this media container, in this case, a book, right?
Mhm.
And that shapes our understanding of what's going on. So, my critique, my problem
Mhm.
with this earlier is that the media environment,
Mhm.
the book, the content in the book, the way
Mhm.
things are put
Mhm.
together
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
largely random. And it's not so much free of context, but it's that the context is shaped by that environment,
Mhm.
not by being tethered or connected to other things. And so what
Not
you
by the author, so to speak. Not by
well,
the
not by
author
the author or not
or
by other
anyone
historical
or
moments or
anyone
anything,
or
right?
anyone. Yeah.
So what you have is a media, what we're calling now a media environment,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Shaped by the book, shaped by the method, which only derives meaning in regard to itself And so what happens, my issue with this, right, is that when you live as we do in such a profoundly media saturated world, right? This is what makes, I'm going to take a step outside here. This is what makes information from one cable news station very different. The meaning of it very different than from another news station, very different from one newspaper. Like every single source, every single media container becomes its own thing and has a meaning endemic to that thing, right? So it's I guess my problem isn't so much a problem that I think that it's wrong. It's just a discomfort for me, is that what you have now are situations where these media environments, right? These containers are self-determinant. They create meaning in and of themselves, not necessarily related to other things. So I think this is as good a point as any to move to Kitnick and his discussion of message massage and how things work. So
Let's do that.
this is just a little brief section here. But Kitnick says, in a lecture
And he
delivered,
summarized, and let me just say this.
yeah,
In this passage that you're about to read, this is at the beginning of the chapter, and he's kind of summarizing the ball. Like this is he's trying to come up with a formulation. He's trying to formulate the ballpark message of the medium is the massage, right? Like,
well,
this is basically what this is
I
about.
think this is an explanation of message to massage.
Yeah.
And so he says, in a lecture delivered on May 7th, 1966 at the 92nd Street Y in New York, he, McLuhan, announced that his main theme would be, quote, that the medium is the massage, not the message, that it really works us over. It really takes hold and massages the population in a savage way. A couple months later, in an article published in Vogue, McLuhan made a similar point about the power of media. Quote, I have found sometimes that it helps to say the medium is the massage, he wrote, because the medium is a complex set of events that roughly handles and works over entire populations. It changes their postures and their outlook. McLuhan, yeah, okay. So I think that's a good place to stop. So this sort of echoes, but this gets us to talking about Kitnick as opposed to talking about Burroughs.
Yeah.
This explains the problem that I have with the cut up much more eloquently, right? That it shapes the way we see things, that this media environment encourages us to see things in one, it massages our perspective, right? To use the language. It encourages us to have a certain disposition, a certain posture, a certain orientation towards the content, towards the media itself.
Wow. Yes, it does. And did you want to say
No,
more, or let me comment on this, because
yeah.
I think what you're talking through here in and Kidnick, well, we're not going to leave behind the subject for the rest of this episode, because the general thing that the general argument or ideas that Kidnick turns over McLuhan is he draws attention to the way that the McLuhan is is wrestling with this question of the meaningfulness of the media massage, whether it's a positive or negative thing, or how should we characterize the media massage. Is it a pharmacon? Is it wholly good and or wholly bad, or is it a pharmacon, a necessary composite of both? So that's the larger question that we're going to be wrestling with, and that Kitnick is wrestling with, and that he sees McLuhan wrestling with. But your comment made me think of something. So this is a quick digression, but I'll try to keep it quick, and then we'll get back to the matter at hand. Michael, as you were talking, you're making me aware of another fundamental ambiguity in McLuhan, and that is in his esteem of artists and his evaluation of artists. So going to the title of the book, artists are a distant, provide the distant early warning for the emergencies to come, for the climate, the environmental climate that is to come. They're futurists, right? But here's the ambivalence, and I sense your criticism of the cut up is that you're uncomfortable with the arbitrariness. When you read the Nova Express or any cut up novel, what you're, in a weird way, the author has it, according to McLuhan, one way of looking at what Burroughs does in a cut-up novel is that he absents himself from being the conscious controller of his narrative. But at the same time, here's a contradiction here. And I don't know if what McLuhan thinks of this contradiction. At the same time, I think what you're uneasy about is the fact that, wow, okay, to read Nova Express, though, ironically enough, paradoxically enough, you have to enter a world that William Burroughs constructed. In a way, William Burroughs, the cut up represents rather this weird kind of double gesture. The author no longer matters, but also at the same time, the author supremely matters because you're reading a book constructed by William
the
Burroughs.
author, right?
And in fact, one could argue, the third novel in the cut up series was The Ticket That Exploded, and it ends. One could argue that that Burroughs' evolution as a cut up writer, that it's not an accident that at the end of his third cut up novel, he interrupts the whole thing to write an essay. And he writes an essay called The Invisible Revolution. And what's the point of the Invisible Revolution? You need to make your own cut-ups. Now, that might be, Jessica Teague actually suggests this in her wonderful book about sound technologies in American literature. She suggests that Burroughs was kind of penitent and kind of realized that, I'm creating an environment that is manhandling, so to speak, the reader. And so that's why he feels almost morally and ethically obliged to end The Ticket that Exploded with this thing like, okay, you know what? You just read a cut-up novel. Please start making your own cut-ups. You got to make your own. Otherwise it's like fascistic, right?
Why is that though? Why is that?
Because for the reason that you're kind of, if I understand you, for the reason he realizes why you're rejecting. I think the reason why you're rejecting the cut up is you feel Burroughs is surreptitiously exerting this control over me as a reader that's somehow suspect. And Teague says, well, Teague speculates that Burroughs himself realizes that he, in a sense, has forced the reader to become his slave, his servant in creating meaning in the book.
Right.
And so he thinks, well, everybody should get into the fun. For this not to be fascist, we're going to have to turn this into democracy. Everybody, literally. And that's what the Invisible Revolution is about. It's like, well, can we now have new technologies that will allow everybody to be a cut-up writer. Now, maybe you're not going to be a cut-up novelist, but you can make your own tapes. And by the way, this is something I didn't bring up earlier, but I think this was an important place that we reached in the last episode, and was our final point, where I think we were speculating, and I'm more and more comfortable with this idea, that the cut-up experiment is an all-purpose art maker, right? Belongs to art. And maybe it's better in the visual arts and the sonic arts than it is in literature. That's one of the places we ended up in the last episode. And I think I'm still very comfortable with that place.
And I think this is the place where I can begin to get comfortable with the cut up, not as an artistic
Practice
endeavor or approach.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
Because there you are being disruptive. And I think this gets us Productively disruptive, I should say. This moves us. This is part of McLuhan's distinction in a little bit. We'll talk about this, I hope, between the mass and the public. And how do you essentially how is it that we might potentially break from the media massage that so completely shapes perception?
Okay, we'll get to that directly, but let me just return. So I talked about the ways in which Burroughs sort of fits in this idea of the media massage, and I repeated Jessica Teague's speculation, but I think it's a good speculation that there is a little bit of a mea culpa that happens in The Ticket That Exploded, which he rewrites, and then he adds this new epilogue to, and the epilogue isn't a cut up, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like a programmatic essay about this is what I mean by cut-ups. And the cut-ups can extend in all these, it can take these various forms. And so this is according to Teague, this is a way of speculating. She speculates that what Burroughs is doing is a mea culpa, saying, you read my novels, and I was exerting I'm not, in one way, I relinquished control over the materials, but in another way, I exerted an incredible amount of control over your concentration and asked you to do all these things as a reader. Um, and it's a little bit one-sided. In fact, it's a lot one-sided. To read a Burroughs cut-up novel,
Mm-hmm.
you're in Burroughs' world and there's no escape from it. And
Despite the
so
fact that he's not a part of it directly.
that's the paradox. Now,
Yes.
I wanted to say, and I'll shut up after this, but I talked about Burroughs' paradox.
Yeah.
I think McLuhan, and this can, I think we can segue to the end here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I just want to make this observation about McLuhan. Where's McLuhan fit in it? I'm detecting something of the same ambivalence in McLuhan. If you go back and, I invite our readers, listeners rather, to look at this short piece that McLuhan writes on Burroughs. It's not clear whether or not Burroughs is a symptom or, he might just be a symptom, or is he the disease or the cure, speaking in pharmacological terms.
Pharmacological, right?
Yeah. Is he the disease? Is what Burroughs is doing, is Nova Express the disease, or is it the cure for the disease? McLuhan, I think, he believes supremely, and this is what Kitnick shows throughout his career and throughout his thought. McLuhan is interested in media environments because he feels that artists were there before him, and that artists are going to somehow take a leading role in the management and transformation of the media environment. So that's his through line. But there might be this sort of core ambiguity in McLuhan. Like, he may admire artists, he may be always talking about the power of artists, but does he fully trust them?
Well,
I don't know.
I want to address this for a second. This notion about is Burroughs emblematic of the cure or the disease, or not even just Burroughs. It's not Burroughs. It's Burroughs and or the cut up,
The cut up,
right?
Burroughs cut up
Right.
method. Yeah.
And I think that this question sort of speaks to the duality of the way of media, like the two. So media shapes us, but at the same time, let me hit
Take
you
us
with
to the end. Yeah, I
no,
think
no,
we're
no, no, no. I don't want to take us to the end. Hold on.
okay.
We're gonna slow roll this for a second.
Okay. Okay.
God, Barry, we are not the kind to move
To
quickly
go
from A to
quickly.
B.
No, 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 it's fine.
Okay, I'm gonna read again. Here we go. For McLuhan, the idea of human origin placed people in control. Yet, without overtly contradicting this position, Massage challenged it with various examples of technology brutally reconfiguring human beings. Skip down. If media originally extended from the body, they now turned back on it, reconfiguring it in new ways. Down again. McLuhan believed that proper attention might place media back under human control. Through a process of reflection, humans could regain control over media by recognizing their powers in them. And then a little bit further down, he says, the extension of any one sense alters the way we think and act, the way we perceive the world. So,
Let me just break in only to say that you are reading for people who we encourage our listeners to follow up. And if you do follow up, we're Michael just read from page 88 of chapter 5, I believe.
89 of
Oh,
chapter 5. Yes.
89. I'm
And
sorry.
that's
Yes,
I was
89.
cherry picking it, but the
Okay.
the idea here is that yes, media shapes us. It provides the lens through which we see and understand. And this was my original problem, right? That okay, but that lens is sort of detached from other things. So what's the value in randomness essentially? McLuhan's so there's your sort of disease, right? Like this is a problem. It works us over in ways that are external to us. The answer, right, is to say, well, if we attend to this, if we really pay attention to what media does,
Mhm.
then we can disrupt this shaping. We can affect it. The counter to that solution, if you will,
Mhm.
is that exposure to the media, right? The extension of any one sense alters the way we act and think, the way we perceive the world. The problem is that being in media environments as we are
Mhm.
actually alters the way in which we are able to see things. So, what I think
True.
is fascinating about this, it's like if you take someone who is completely external
Mhm.
to any media environment. I mean, this is a stretch, right? But you take somebody who's completely unmarked by media
Mhm.
and you bring them in, they're going to have a particular reaction to whatever. If you leave that person, they are shaped by that media. The shaping of media, one,
Mhm.
is going to impact the way that they understand media, two. We are actually permanently affected and shaped by these things.
Mhm.
And so it becomes, I think, a question of the chicken or the egg at a certain point. Like, how is it that our ability to disrupt or to change the way that to affect the way that the media environment affects us, to exert agency, if you will, is limited by the amount of exposure we have to media in the first place.
Okay. Well, Michael, I think I do want to shift to the end in direct reaction to what you said, and I want to pose a question for you
Fire away.
because it's directly related to what you're saying. Um, um, so our plan. Yeah, we plan these episodes. Yeah, we did. I know it doesn't seem that way, but yeah, we do. Our plan was to sort of move through chapter 5 of Kitnick and end with this after talking about the specific ways that McLuhan, you know, illustrates or argues that media massages us. We wanted to end with the discussion, with Kitnick's discussion of a primary distinction that McLuhan makes. That is McLuhan's solution, McLuhan's way of sort of cutting the Gordian knot of proceeding in this morass. And there's a distinction. So there's a distinction. I'll read it if you don't mind,
Mhm.
because I want to ask you a question. It's directly related, though, to what you just said. So Kitnick points out that what to do with the media massage. And Kitnick notes that McLuhan is a half glass full, half glass empty kind of guy, or in the critical media studies vocabulary parlance, he's a pharmacological kind of guy. That's
Right.
what we would say. Kitnick stresses McLuhan's positivism or positive outlook, optimism, in the sense that, okay, we're getting massaged by the media, but there's still this redemptive possibility. And so I'll read from this. Like Jürgen Habermas, McLuhan equated, yeah, okay. Like Jürgen Habermas, McLuhan equated the public sphere with print, rational detachment, self-reflection, and differing points of view. So there's a public. McLuhan, so Kitnick is arguing that McLuhan is working with a notion of the public as capable of rational detachment, self-reflection, and coming to and coming to judgment, coming the ability to achieve reflective judgments. And against this response to the media environment, the media massage, McLuhan also believed we could respond to the media massage either as a mass, as a public, in the Habermasian sense, or as a mass. The mass, on the other hand, here I'm reading from Kitnick on page 90 of chapter 5. The mass, on the other hand, an absorbed and involved community prone to nervous reactions in response to the audio environment, or, the media environment.
The media, yeah.
Media environment. Thrives on simultaneity, and contemporary artworks, McLuhan believed, conveyed something of this new social form. Now, so basically what's going on here is that McLuhan has his hope that we're all being massaged and barraged in various ways by the media environment. But there's a hope that we're all a mass. The media makes a mass that is prone to respond nervously or, to respond unreflectively to the media massage.
I just want to clarify one quick question.
Sure, of course.
We are a mass by virtue of the fact that we're all plugged into the same environments. Right. Okay.
So, and that's an important point to make, because I think Kitnick would agree, and I think you would agree, right, that even though McLuhan is writing this in the mid-1960s, in a way, and we're talking now about a very different media environment, a digital media environment, but not a different media environment in the sense of when you plug in, you are sort of taking on, you're sort of inviting yourself to be barraged by this particular sense around immersive media environment. Okay. And so McLuhan has hopes, Habermasian, Hannah Arendtian hopes, that nonetheless, it's possible to come up with it's possible for individuals to individuate and adopt a reflective attitude to the media barrage. And his hope is that the mass will become a public. Okay, so now I was saying I wanted to relate this directly to what you said.
Mm-hmm.
This is what Kitnick says this is McLuhan's, this is the problem McLuhan is posing to us in the medium is the massage. We're being massaged by media, but we can get some agency, as you were showing in the passage you read, as you illustrated in the passage you read. We get some agency by exerting control, by reflecting on our position, our place within the media barrage. But Michael, now after that long preamble, forgive me the long preamble.
No, sure.
But I think it directly relates to what you just asked, because if I understood you, you brought up the fact that, well, wait a minute. What this underestimate, as I understood you, you were saying, well, maybe it's not possible to make this differentiation between the mass and the public, because that differentiation, the existence of that difference, presumes something that doesn't exist, which is an individual who is always already outside of that thing and then being brought in. That's what I understood you to be.
Yes. And I think that there's
I think you're pushing against McLuhan's solution or categorization, or are you? That's our last question.
McLuhan does not have. So McLuhan has two buckets.
You got two buckets.
We are all a part of the mass by virtue of the fact that we are electronically connected.
Massaged.
Right? And by virtue of the fact that we're electronically connected, we are massaged. Right. And the way out of this is not really a way out. The way to differentiate yourself from the mass.
Yeah, there's no way out. That's important.
To be a part of the public, right? It's important to note there is no private, right? Like I imagine there's the Aboriginal island somewhere, right? And every now and then we fly a helicopter over it and they throw spears at the helicopter, right? That's the private. Okay. They are not electrified. And so anything that comes into that is met with resistance. Okay. Because of the fact that we're already massaged, so to speak, we can hope to shift into the public, which is to say we can have an opinion and that there's potential for that opinion, like my opinion can differ from yours, right? Can certainly differ from any of the people listening to this, right? You are allowed your opinion, but those opinions still exist juxtaposed against each other or in solidarity with each other in a
Mm-hmm.
public that is not
Mm-hmm.
mass mediated, right? Like these are now individual, like there's room to breathe, but you're still a part of a collection. You can't ever be private because the media environment doesn't allow for it.
Mm-hmm.
And if we want to get,
Well, you're never by private, I think you
you're never
don't,
unplugged.
you're never unplugged, you're never totally isolated.
Right. That's a better way of saying it. I don't want to, because I think the terminology becomes problematic or dangerous if we're not
Yeah,
careful.
yeah. So
But you
I
can't,
think what you mean is you can't be isolated. So
yes.
so but and you were implying earlier, just to return to what you said earlier, but maybe you weren't implying this, so that's why I'm returning to it. I thought you were implying earlier that that fact that we can never be
We're always massaged. We're always
that we're
influenced
always
in
being
some way.
massaged, that that somehow makes the possibility of public differentiation maybe messier or less tenable than McLuhan suggests it is?
Well, I don't know that
Does
it's
it change
less.
the nature of that? Okay, so here's how Habermas, let me go back to the quote.
So listen,
Habermas,
McLuhan,
well, let me see,
yeah, we're
so
looking at the
we know
same
what
line.
criteria we're talking about, like
Hmm.
Jürgen Habermas. So here's the characteristics of publicness, right? Um, print, rational detachment, self-reflection, and the possibility, interestingly enough, to come up with different points, different opinions, different,
Right.
you know, so ironically, the ability to differentiate, to come up with a different view, that in itself is something that being public allows you to do.
But
So is there something about the lack of isolation that is getting in the way of all these things that characterize a
I think so.
public-minded day?
I think so. If you look at that, like Habermas, McLuhan equated the public sphere with print. That's the very first thing, right?
Right. Yes,
Print,
it is.
rational attachment, self-reflection,
Yeah.
differing points of view. That's still media, right? You're still influenced. It's just an analog media that allows for you to engage. Like you're going to engage differently. And this gets back to his, you're going to have to help me here, but the hot and cold mediums.
Oh, right, right, right. Well, the hot medium is the one that doesn't allow for it. Am I getting it wrong? I think I'm going to get it. Here we go. Luckily, I can refer to Kitnick to help us out here. Hot visual media includes print and film. Cold media encourages tactility and interactivity. Here's the thing where I always get confused, and it probably confuses you too.
The language
Cold
seems
media is
opposite.
interactive.
Yes,
The
it seems
thing that makes,
counterintuitive.
see, we think of hot media, or I think of hot media, my common sense understanding is that allows for interactivity. It's the
No,
opposite of McLuhan.
no, but I think this is the difference, right? The cold media, McLuhan's cold media, is the media of the mass. It is reactive,
Yes, yes, yes. Right,
right?
right, right.
Whereas the hot media, print, film,
It's the deliberative thing, right?
exactly, it enables there is
Yeah,
a space there for reflection,
yeah.
but you are still responding to, massaged by a media environment.
I'm going to take what you just said as my final answer, though, of course, I'm going to allow you a final answer because I think I love the fact, when I read that sentence on page, whatever it was 50, I think.
Nine,
90,
90.
not even close. When I read the sentence on page 90, you noted it. I glossed over the word print, and
Mm-hmm.
I went to the characteristics of the deliberative public. You're totally right that Kitnick begins that sentence with print. That's not an accident. I think what we just hit on there is the answer to your question, or I'm going to posit it as an answer to your question. McLuhan is admitting the fact or just acquiescing or just acknowledging, rather, that's the word, He's acknowledging the fact that we live in a fully mediated world. But where I think he's hopeful is that he assumes that by oscillating, by pivoting between media forms, not by eradicating them, but by pivoting between different media forms, I think he sees that ability to pivot as a sign or symptom. I'm going to sneeze in a moment. Am I going to sneeze and interrupt this? Uh,
Yeah, half. As not a
do we
satisfying
cut?
sneeze.
Do we cut or
Not at
no?
all. So
All
you're
right.
saying
All right.
the ability to pivot,
My
because this is really
apologies.
interesting. The ability to pivot.
The ability to pivot is what we mean, or what I think that's a space of deliberative rational action.
Okay.
But it's not happening outside media. This is what I'm taking from your comment. So your comment,
As in,
your
it
question.
cannot happen outside media because there really isn't an outside of
Yeah.
media.
So this is my answer to your question, your great question, the problem you were positing earlier. Okay. You are drawing attention to the fact, well, this spot of reflection, can it really happen outside media? Now, on a closer reading of Kitnick slash McLuhan,
McLuhan.
I think it's pretty clear that McLuhan was not having my problem, was not having my issue. I was separating reflection from media. And I think with McLuhan and with Kitnick, it's this ability to pivot between media forms, between old quote unquote and new media forms, quote unquote. The ability to pivot is a space of rational reflection.
Right. So here's my response to that. I think that's
Okay.
right. My problem is not a problem with McLuhan or Kitnick or Falk, right?
Mhm.
My concern, let's rebrand this, is that McLuhan's hope in 1966
Mhm.
was that we could separate ourselves from the mass and become a public capable
Of
of
reflecting on the
reflection.
differences between media environments.
And that this was
Media.
something, as you had said, that we could do by pivoting. The problem is that I'm not so comfortable with the idea that there are as many pivots available to us now, right? Because you think about this, right? The public starts with print. Print now is all digital, right? The idea that we have distinct media environments is problematized by the fact that everything seems to be sort of coalescing around this digital internet platform. And so I think that we have fewer opportunities for reflection. I'm not going to say that they're not there. They're certainly there, but the media environment has become much more densely saturated
Agreed. Agreed.
and much more focused on the electronic mass creating. So and I think you see this, we have become a more reactive mass. We have become a more reactive group of, I don't want to say mass or public. Those are the two terms I'm trying to avoid. As a people, we've become more reactive. We've become less reflective. And I think that you can point to a number of different spaces where you see this playing out. I could also be getting very old and two steps away from yelling at people to get off my lawn, but you get the idea. The idea here is that these media are massaging us, they are shaping us, and as they coalesce, we have fewer opportunities for reflection.
Okay. We're
Okay, so sorry, teams, our media environment had a little glitch, and we were cut off, but we are back. And Barry, I believe you were going to say something to wrap us up.
Well, I was just going to do what old teachers always do, which is talk about their students. And so, and tell you something I noticed about my students. I'm currently fortunate enough to be teaching this really wonderful group of students in media theory class. And what I noticed, and I don't know, is this anthropologically or sociologically compelling? I don't know. Is this only true of a minority section of a minority? I don't know. But what I notice about them is that's what you were describing as your account was, or your addendum to McLuhan was, it's become more and more difficult
To pivot.
to it's become more and more difficult to make the kind of pivot that McLuhan seems to require between different media environments. And I certainly agree with that. But I was about to say that my students routinely talk about this. My students almost uniformly, and I don't think they're just talking to make me feel better, saying something that makes me feel better, because I wouldn't necessarily feel better if they responded differently, but they always tell me about their residual attraction or attachment, for example, to print media. That's always comes out. Does that mean that they don't mostly, maybe almost 99%, um, uh, encounter quote unquote print media in digital forms? No, it doesn't. But their residual affection is for the 1%, 2%, 5%. They're aware of the value of the residual form, and they make that pivot.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I think that's right, but I also think that that is a dwindling percentage. And I don't know that it's
Right.
ever going to go away.
But maybe it will never go away. I mean, that in itself is reason for hope that even 60 years
It
later.
is. And you see different versions of this sentiment pop up where people are suddenly, I'm going to delete my social media accounts, or I'm going to take a break, or what's the other version of this, right? I'm going to suddenly start investing in vinyl. I'm not going to stream my music. I
Sure,
mean,
sure, sure, sure.
there's
It's
there's there's
awareness of the other medium, right?
there, and I think that as long as there's an awareness and a willingness,
Yeah, yeah.
um, then there's the potential to pivot and to become reflective. But my point was just that I think that
I agree.
as we continue to watch technological expansion happen, it just all of these different media forms get subsumed and concentrated, and I think that that creates
Who can
a
argue?
complication.
Who can argue with Dr. Michael Rapici on that point? I mean, that seems to unarguable. However, it's worth mentioning because Ted Kaczynski is the other. I don't want to call him the
Don't you
patron
dare call him the
saint.
patron saint.
I don't want to call him, but we've often mentioned the Kaczynski critique, and it's interesting to note. I promise this really is the last thing to say. It's interesting to note that the Kaczynski method is not what we're talking about with the pivot, right? The pivot is not the same thing as saying I'm making a break with media
No,
outlets,
because
right?
you're still a part
That's
of
a
a
very
public.
important difference,
It is,
right?
and this is still you're still a bona fide member of a public. I think when you
Correct.
make
Right. It's a big difference, right?
yeah,
It's not the
yeah,
same thing.
what we can officially start referring to as the Kaczynski method, is an attempt to sever those
Sever
public
the
connections
connections.
and to not engage.
We're gonna blow it
But it's
up
an
rather
it's
than
an I
pivot,
will say, and
right?
I do think we need to probably finish here at some
Man,
point.
stop. We
But
need to stop.
it is interesting because what I'm gonna call it the Kaczynski method. What the Kaczynski method entails is now a complete abandonment
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
of
For the media
dialectic,
state.
of engaging with different
Right,
perspectives and different
right,
point of
right,
views.
right.
Um, and that's not productive in well, it's certainly not productive in this way,
Right.
right? That
Yeah, there is no interface between whatever, it's interesting because the ancient ideals of the agora and the public sphere that Habermas and Hannah Arendt were thinking of and to a certain degree championing, um, that was obviously Kaczynski's goal as well. But, the pivot makes participation in a public
mandatory
possible,
and
right? Yeah.
mandatory.
And mandatory. Whereas the Kaczynski method is obviously about, calling a halt to that project.
Well, Barry, this has been a productive discussion. We have coined a new term,
The Kaczynski method.
the
That's our
Kaczynski
next
method, and
series of episodes on the Kaczynski method, and the FBI will start
yeah, they'll be
cracking
they'll be knocking on
down,
your door. They'll be knocking on your
knocking
door.
on your door.
Yeah, okay. Well, this was good. I enjoyed this. This was fun, and we'll pick this up next time.
We'll pick it up next time. Take care.
All right, Barry, take care.
Thanks for listening to the Critical Media Studies podcast. To find out more about the show, check out our webpage at criticalmediastudiespodcast.com.